This video is sponsored by Policy Genius. Hey everyone, Michael Alm here. So this week I'm back working on Ashley's workbench. We've done 2 videos so far, one on building the workbench itself, one on building the drawers for the workbench, and this one is going to cover the organizers. I know that Ashley is going to be using her laptop on this workbench a lot for reference and to watch movies while she works, and so I figured it'd be good to build a riser for it. This will also give me space to add a couple more drawers, and it'll lift the laptop up off of the surface of the table so it won't get into any harm. Whenever I'm designing something like this, cardboard is such a great tool. It's great for making maquettes. It's really quick to sort of rough out designs, and this was great because I could bring Ashley in, have her take a look at it, and make sure that she liked the shape of it before I committed to making it out of plywood. What do you think?
Looks great.
All right.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, that's perfect.
Does this seem about right? 6 inches right here.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So you can...
It's just enough that it doesn't get in your way.
Yeah, no, and this is great. I think this is nice because I still have space here. Don't show off my nails. What's in there?
We'll make it out of plywood now. With Ashley's seal of approval, I could start making it for real. And since I just drew this by hand, I didn't want to rely completely on it, but it was a good starting point. So what I did was I used an ice pick and found the center of the circle, and then just used a string to make a perfect arc. With the top all sanded up, I could start making the dividers for the riser. So I'm making a back panel out of 1/4 inch and then these dividers out of 1/2 inch. I cut all those down to size, but I needed one for the sort of longer end, and for that I wanted to match the curve. You don't really have to cut it on a curve. At this point it's just really an angle. So I used my angle finder, set my table saw blade to that angle, and then I can cut it with my Rockler miter gauge. Since this is just a workbench, I thought I'd take it easy on myself and just nail the back on. You could recess this back if you wanted to hide the plywood, but there's so much exposed edge grain plywood on this build anyway, I figured why not. For the center section, I wanted to add some drawers, and so I just picked this spot where kind of the curve ended and nailed in another block there, making sure that it's really nice and square. It's pretty important because I'm just going to have some free-floating drawers in here. For the drawer fronts, I'm going to be using some pattern plywood that I have in the shop from previous projects. Pattern plywood is great for this sort of thing, little accents and stuff. If you're not familiar with pattern plywood, welcome to my channel. I have a whole bunch of videos on the subject. I have 4 different tutorials on the different styles of patterns that you can make, and I'll link to them down below. They're not as complex as they look. They're way easier to make than you'd think, and I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for people to learn how. So I'm making 4 drawers here, and I set the first 3 just to the width of the plywood that I already had, and then I'm cutting this last one down to fit. I cut a little extra off of that last panel just to make sure that I had a 16th inch gap between the drawer and the compartment. Then I used the drawer front and a 16th inch handy shim to space out each compartment, and then glued and nailed the dividers into place. While the dividers were drying, I went over to the router table to route out the sides of the drawer fronts. I wanted to do a little rabbited edge, but as you could see, the router was not kind to me. It did not like this pattern plywood, and it tore out the edges, and it ripped out whole corners. You see, this was the second one, and this whole side is gone now. It's okay, I was able to fix it, but for the next two, I went over to the table saw and I cut the rabbets on the table saw. In my last video, I showed these setup bars and people asked me a whole bunch about them. It is a Rockler product. I'll link it down below. They're the Rockler Precision setup bars. So after getting my table saw blade set up to the correct height, I was able to cut this. It wasn't perfect. It still tore out a little bit, but it was way gentler than using the router table. To repair the broken pattern plywood pieces, I reached into my bin of excess pattern plywood. I keep this for this exact reason because, it has a tendency to chip out if you're not careful. So, like I said, it's not that hard to repair, and I'm going to show you how. So for the one that I cut at the table saw, you can see this corner just got lopped off. And for that, I just took one of my hex pattern plywood pieces and used a chisel to cut off a corner that was big enough to handle, but small enough that it wouldn't be too much trimming. When it came to the ones where they lost a full corner, what I did was I used my chisel and I carved back to where the pattern started. I then took an excess piece of pattern plywood over to the bandsaw and I ripped it slightly larger than I needed, but I don't want to have to remove a ton of material. And then once it was to thickness, I could just glue them back into place. To finish off the drawers, I'm making the drawer sides and bottoms. This is just out of 1/2 inch plywood that I had left over from the rest of the build. Now you can see why I made those rabbets. This just slots right into place. It's a super simple way to make a drawer, barring the explosion of the pattern plywood. If you were to make one like this without the pattern plywood, it would be a snap. Super happy with how these little drawers came out, and before we install them into the desk, let's talk about this week's sponsor. Big thank you to Policy Genius for sponsoring this video. Since the beginning of this year, I've been putting off researching and restructuring my insurance policies. It's not the most fun thing in the world, and I get really hung up on the details. I know that there's lots of options out there, but it's hard for me to figure out whether I'm getting a good deal or not. Policy Genius is an online insurance marketplace, not an insurance company. The Policy Genius team handles the paperwork, scheduling, and negotiating on your behalf, and with Policy Genius, you can easily apply online and compare your quotes in one place. They provide quotes from top companies in minutes, which cover everything from auto insurance to homeowners insurance, from pet insurance to life insurance. For example, you can save $1,300 or more per year by using Policy Genius to compare life insurance quotes. I found Policy Genius super easy to use, and they definitely got me over the insurance procrastination that was holding me back. Visit policygenius.com/MichaelAlm to shop the marketplace and save today. Again, you can save up to 50% on life insurance policies by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. So go check it out. originally designed the workbench, I designed this top shelf, and by the time I finished it, I didn't have a full panel to go on top of it, and I still don't, but I actually think that this is a much cooler solution. I cut what scraps I had left down into individual strips, and then I was able to make this sort of old school roof rack looking thing. Another use for those steel bars is to hang a work light. I quickly fabricated this piece out of scrap, and it's just enough to get a couple screws in so that the work light has a place to hang. I really like having this above my working space, just set a little bit in front of my eyes, and it seems to light things up pretty well. I think Ashley will like it. Another feature that I'm going to be stealing from my workbench is this. It's just a piece of sheet metal that I'm screwing to the back panel. This is great for hanging up inspirational images, templates, drawings, whatever you need for whatever project you're working on. Just hang them up with magnets. And speaking of magnets, I also picked up a magnetic tool holder for Ashley's workbench. These are great for Dremel bits or carving tools, whatever you like. There's lots of things that this can be used for. One thing that I don't like about them is they always put this cheap tape over the top of them. I've done this trick before on another project, but I really like it. I just take a piece of double stick tape and add a piece of wood veneer to it, and it gives it a much classier look. Next thing to organize is Ashley's hand tools. She said specifically that she wanted a nice place to put these gouges for printmaking. She does a lot of lino block printing, and she's hoping to do even more of it with the new workbench. So I thought I'd make her a super classy one out of ash wood. And for those of you wondering where I got this square from, it's made by Tony Relu of Hillview Wood and Metal. I commissioned it from him. It's not a sponsor or anything. I just think he's an incredible craftsman. Go check out his Instagram if you want to see some beautiful tools and commission one for yourself. So again, I wanted to make this really special for Ashley, and I decided to fancy it up with this corbel, I think is the term. I think it's called a corbel. It's a support block from underneath, but it's got some fancy curves to it. To give the corbel a little bit more strength, I decided to dado out the organizer. This just adds a bit more glue surface, so when you glue it up, it'll be nice and strong. Might not be completely necessary for something this small, but it also looks really nice. For a cut like this, I like to use my crosscut sled and just sneak up on it, gradually getting that fit closer and closer, and eventually the corbel will slot right in. Another function of the corbel is that it gives me a spot to anchor it to the wall. So I just quickly drilled out some countersink holes and it's ready to go. So before I hang up that section onto the wall, I wanted to make sure and get a few more of the organizers under my belt. I did a few different designs, as you could see by all the templates on the table. I arrived at this one. I'm going to be using this for 2 different style holders. One's for hammers and one's for pliers. There are a lot of similar steps to making all these tool holders. You essentially use a template, cut it out on the bandsaw, and then sand it down with the sander. One thing is that I do design this around my sander to make sure that the curve isn't smaller than my sander. And another thing is to get that hole in the exact center point. I just use my template along with the brad point bit that I'm going to be using to drill out the hole, and I can tap it in and get a mark in the exact right position. So both of these tool holders are made pretty much the same way, but I didn't cover the hammer one because it fails. You'll see that in a minute. But one thing that I need for both of them are some steel rods, and I cut those on my portaband. So I definitely should have done a dry fit earlier in the build process than this, because what I did wrong, I measured the hammers off of the width of the neck, but not the base. So when I tried to fit the first one in, it fit just fine. But the second one, it didn't fit at all, not in any way whatsoever. So what I did instead was just used what I had, and I tore off one of the sides, and then I actually figured that might work on its own. Both of the hammers fit just fine, and so all I had to do was kind of adapt that to a somewhat new design, but I just ended up using the same parts, drilled out some countersunk holes, cut it down to fit, and sanded it up. I was a little concerned that the hammers might fall with vibration and stuff, so I took the 2 metal rods that I had and used a pipe as a lever arm and bent them slightly on the end. The last thing to do on the hammer holder is to glue the rods into place, and for this I'm just going to use 5-minute epoxy. With a number of organizers made, I felt comfortable screwing in some to the actual back wall. I talked with Ashley about where she wanted things approximately, and we sort of decided where it makes the most sense. I feel like these will move, they'll change, we'll replace ones, just depending on what she's working on and what she needs. There's nothing precious about this. I think I know it's looking like I'm making things nice and perfect, but the hope is that as her collection grows, as things change, you can just unscrew these from the wall and screw new ones in or shift them around as you need. Once I'd mounted those 3 tool holders, it became apparent that I had a little extra space to work in. So for that, I decided to make a little 6-inch by 2-inch shelf that I don't know what Ashley's going to use it for, but I'm sure she'll find something to put on it. This is made exactly the same way as the chisel holder. The only difference is I put a little bit of a lip on the front edge and I didn't add any holes to it. But it's basically just a rinse and repeat, and it shows that you can make all sorts of different organizers using the same exact technique. So that's the left side done. Now I'm going to move over to the right-hand side, and Ashley had requested a spot to keep her embroidery hoops. This is a really simple one. It's basically a block of wood with a bunch of dowels in it, but sometimes the simple solutions are the best solutions. So the last back panel organizer I'm going to build is for Ashley's paintbrushes and kind of odds and ends. She's got some sculpting tools and things like that. Great way to store those is in mason jars, and so I'm going to make a little mason jar holster. If you're using a big hole saw like this on your drill press, just be careful. You can tell I'm gripping pretty hard on this one. You can clamp it down if you need to, and just take your time. At this point, I decided I had made enough corbels, so I just countersunk the holes through the holes for the mason jars. Then all I had to do was connect it to the back panel, and it was ready to go. So there's still a couple more odds and ends to do on this workbench. And while I install this divider into this side cabinet, I wanted to mention that this workbench has complete plans on my website. As I mentioned before, there are 2 other videos on this project, and there's also a 25-page step-by-step guide in both metric and imperial on how to build this for your own workshop. So go check it out. It's almfab.com/plans. I'm really proud of this design, and I've put a lot of effort into making the plans DIY friendly. There's an option to make the workbench entirely out of wood, so if you don't have a welder, you can totally build this. And if you do make this workbench, please let me know. I would love to hear about it. Hit me up on Instagram. You can also use the hashtag almfabworkbench. The next thing I'm going to organize is Ashley's drawers. I picked up some of the lock-aligned from Rockler. This stuff is great to quickly organize your drawers, set it up, and you can change it super easily, which is really cool. Basically, all I'm going to do is I'm going to put these into place in the drawers for Ashley, and then she can go through and arrange them as she needs. I swear I didn't plan this at all, but these fit perfectly into these drawers. If they don't fit, you can cut them down to size. But as you can see, they clip into place super easily, and they're a really quick way to organize your drawers. So last and definitely not least is power. You gotta have power when you're working at a workbench, and I decided to conceal it back in here. It just made a lot of sense, and it'll be close to the computer, so you can put a computer charger in there. Just made a mark on the underside of the riser, and then I can bring it into the shop and drill a hole in it. keep the riser from moving around, I just put a couple of screws in each corner, and that was enough to stabilize it. And then the last thing to do on the power strip is just to connect it to the back. There wasn't a good mounting method with this power strip, but I found that just using some sticky back Velcro was a simple solution. Now, after more than a month of designing and building and organizing this workbench, it's all done and Ashley can move in. What do you think of it?
It's great. I'm so excited. Yeah.
Ashley, can you take me on a tour?
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I'm thinking watercolors and gouache up here so it's easily accessible and I can just dump it out. And then top drawer, beading stuff, and a little bit of accessories. Next drawer, jewelry making stuff, and all the little like eye pins and things like that. Then I have this as a screen printing drawer, but I think it'll possibly become embroidery. Dremel, more screen printing, other stuff, and the rest I'm still trying to figure out.
Cool. You like it?
I love it. Winston, what do you think? Is it good? Come here. There you go. Come